So people often bring up that HashiCorp has a lot of products and they do quite a lot of different things. What's the best approach for adopting those products? Would you? Why would you? And how does that fit into the operating model in the cloud?
Yeah, I think it's a super common question because it's like there's a lot of tools and a lot of places to start. And I think what we've seen is a pretty common pattern around organizations that are either operations-led or more security-led, right? Just depending on which team tends to be sort of the front foot for new initiatives. And so for organizations that are more sort of operationally led, their first challenge is, great, I want to go to cloud. How do I provision anything there? Right? My day one provisioning challenge is the sort of primary concern of the ops group. And so it tends to be sort of a Terraform focus around, can we bring in Terraform? And it gives us some way to sort of define a workflow around day one provisioning, day two management that's going to work not only in our first cloud, but inevitably in our second and third, and probably private clouds as well. And so it first starts around the journey of Terraform. Great, let's get the first 10 VMs running and define our network. But I think from there, the challenge pretty quickly becomes, great, we have 5 VMs running, but how does the web server get the database credential? And what about these encryption keys? And what about the API tokens we need to distribute? So I think then the challenge quickly becomes, okay, if we want to automate the delivery of these apps, we have to do it in some way that's secure. And so I think then the next logical tool becomes Vault, right? It's like, great, we've automated spinning up the 5 web servers. How do we now have somewhere that they can automatically, when they boot, go provision the credentials they need? So I think the step 2 becomes deploy Vault as a sort of initial identity broker and secret management store so that the apps can come up, authenticate against Vault, and fetch the secrets they need to actually do useful things. So I think the Terraform first, then Vault tends to happen for ops-led organizations. For security, it'll be backward, right? Their first challenge is, I have a bunch of Amazon keys and certificates and username and passwords that I need to securely distribute, but I'm not going to let any apps go to the cloud until I know what I'm going to do with these things. So it tends to be for those organizations, they first start with Vault and figure out, okay, I can run one copy on-premise, one copy in the cloud, and replicate between them. So I have a consistent way of managing policy and secrets no matter where it's running. So they usually start with that. And then from there, it becomes a conversation of, great, I've run this thing. How do I now deploy 10 apps that are, one's a web server, one's an API, one's a database, and allow them to programmatically get those secrets? So then it becomes sort of a Terraform conversation, right? So I think those tend to be the 2 starting points.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that our products, we built our products because we viewed each of these problems as fairly fundamental in terms of adopting cloud and just adopting a more dynamic way of looking at infrastructure. And so, whether it's Terraform, Vault, Consul, Nomad, the idea is that those problems you will reach. And as you said, depending on the type of organization you are, depending on the pain points that are in your organization, who's most innovative, you'll hit one of them first. But the idea is that in a modern dynamic environment, we don't need to sell you on anything. You're going to hit that problem, and we believe our solutions are the right way to solve them.
And it is funny to your point that it's like, we actually didn't really build them in the order necessarily we see people adopt, right? Which is like Consul actually predates Vault and Terraform, but in practice tends to be like the third tool that gets adopted, right? Which is like, our thinking at the time was really, great, I'm going to deploy all these microservices, and they're all going to be independent teams, right? Team A and Team B and Team C aren't going to coordinate. They're going to just deploy at different rates. And so the problem is if they need static IPs to coordinate between them, it'll never work. So our thinking from the very beginning was actually you need Consul first, but in practice it turns out you need Terraform to deploy the apps to begin with, and you need Vault to secure them. And then your third problem is, great, I've deployed these apps that are secure, but they need some way to talk to each other now. Like, I booted them all, but how does my web server find the API? How does the API find the database? So my sort of day 3 problem actually becomes, I need sort of a dynamic networking framework for all of this. And so it's funny that we started with Consul, but in practice it's actually like the third tool that gets deployed.
Yeah, getting into the weeds a little bit. I mean, I think that the prioritization was sort of what had adequate band-aids at any given moment. And I think that security, we just encrypt everything in the database. It's like an adequate band-aid, but it doesn't scale very well for what you need and all sorts of things. And so it's like, but Consul was a huge issue that we didn't have a solution for.
Right.
And so building that first was more of a, what could we get away with versus necessarily the way the problems occur.
And I think then it's interesting that Nomad is last, right? Because it's like, in some sense, if you think about the necessary challenges of the cloud operating model, it's like, my first problem is how do I provision? My second problem is how do I secure this? The third problem is how do I connect it all? The fourth and last problem is, great, I have this common stack, but now I want to light up my developers to launch 100 different types of applications on top. So I want kind of a common deployment and runtime platform. And it was sort of made sense. I think that was the last piece. Like you kind of have to solve the others first.
Yep.
So it's interesting on that layer. So I think that tends to map to what we see from an adoption is you kind of got to nail the first three because that affects every app, no matter whether it's Spark or Kubernetes or Nomad based, right? You have those problems. And once you get to that runtime layer, that's when you have a bunch of choice. You might say, I'm going to go pure cloud native with Lambda. I might go Kubernetes and run it on and off prem. I might go Nomad and have sort of large scale scheduler. But the other three are sort of more essential.